Hello again YouTube, dobrodošli once again. I do apologise, it's still sweaty, and you know what, as much as I love this, I'm going to take it off. It's... I can't die for aesthetics anymore, I'm too off for this shit. Now, if you recently just seen my top 5 ex Yugoslavian goth / post-punk videos, then this is my top 5 ex Yugoslavian synth wave video. Now these ones are a tiny bit harder, but the problem is, as I mentioned in my last video, you find some amazing songs from these various bands, but the problem is they either didn't last that long, or it's a case of it's just extremely hard to find any information on a lot of this, on these bands. So once again, same thing, there's going to be loads of honourable mentions towards the end because of the lack of information I could find. The first band I'm going to mention, there's not much I could find, but had to keep it as a top 5. So goddamn Ex Yugoslavian for making great music, but not enough information. So without further ado, let's get started. So as I mentioned, this one, there's not really that much information because there isn't that much I can find or research about this band. But this band was formed in 1986 from the Macedonian part of Yugoslavia, and this is Begotten. Now what I like about the song Gleka from Begotten, because it's the only one of a couple I could find, is the fact that it's so raw, and the fact that it has this type of darker element to say the new wave, but not exactly that much of cold wave. I guess you can say touching on the cold wave element of the wave spectrum that this video is going to be covering, because this one we're going to be covering synth wave, dark wave, cold wave, even just general synth pop and new wave. So I just wanted to bring it starts off. I know it's a bit like not on a strong beginning, but trust me, it's going to get a lot more in description. And I just wanted to introduce this one because I thought that this was a nice mention, and there's a bit more information that I could find about this. All I know is that it was about 1986, and I think it didn't last too long. I'm thinking about, what did I say, only just a couple of years that this band, which was quite big in the underground scene, allowed to last, or it lasted for that long, should I say. But that's the thing though, towards the end of the 80s, pushing towards the 90s, you would tend to find that a lot of the electronic sounds were, or a lot of the electronic subgenres were basically fading out, as much to say, because obviously it was still prominent in the Western countries, but I think with the Eastern countries it was a lot harder to maintain because of the competition that the Yugoslavian scene had, because you also had the rock music, had the punk and the goth stuff. And I think that during the mid-80s that the synth sound, it dominated the Yugoslavian scene for a while, especially in Belgrade. But then I think after a while it's kind of faded out, especially with the underground darker wave bands. So yeah, just wanted to roll that one off the bat, keep a nice even 5. Okay, number 4, this is a Croatian band called Kaos. Now with Kaos, they were originally a punk band, but then shifted more towards the electronic synth sound. You'd find with most bands, actually, even in bands in England, you'll see that they'll go from when punk was the big thing in the 70s, and then they would slowly move towards the new wave scene, probably because this is during a time when punk bands were not getting many gigs, because many venues would not want to book punk bands anymore, so they had to alter their sound to fit more of a new wave category, which allowed them to get more shows. And what I like about Kaos is how they blended their punk element with this electronic element. I mean, you can clearly hear that they have this traditional electronic-y sound, very East European structure, if you have to admit, with the repeating of arpeggios and the way how it kind of loops on that bit. But then you also have these type of punky drums behind it, and their vocalists clear punk iconic vocals. You can tell this is straight off the bat of punk. There was no brushing up or polishing, it's still raw as punk, and that's what I quite like about this band, how they can keep that type of mixture together without losing too much of the original sound. And one thing which I did find interesting is the fact they were very big in their cult following, especially in the underground scene in Croatia, and especially when in the sorry if I mispronounce this because I'm not very good with Croatian cities, the Rijeka music scene. So apparently that's like the region which their music like most predominantly like saw the biggest fan base, even though I think they were actually from that region, but it shows how much of a cult following they did have, especially even now after they've expanded, how they're still even being played in certain parts of Croatia in the underground scene. So yeah, I want to give that one a little shout out as well. Okay, number 3, we are going to go towards the Slovenian side of Yugoslavia, and we're going to go with the band Demolition Group for number 3. Okay, Demolition Group, from what I could find and what I researched, is they did go underneath a different name for another period of time, and they started using Demolition Group as a name from 1985 up to think about the 1990s, and then from what I found out, they kind of split for a while, then they reformed, but the music genre just completely like changed. They got rid of the whole like electronic-y scene and went straight for more like a middle of the road type of metal type of vibe. I know that seems a little bit odd to say, but I wanted to focus more on like the music they created during the Yugoslavian era, which was like the synthwave type of stuff. One thing I did notice, which I like about them, which I find to be completely different to all the other bands on the shortlist, is how they kind of pioneer like the minimal wave type of music genre. And yeah, it's exactly what it says. It's quite minimalistic in the structure of how it's composed, but the way how it's composed gives it, almost ironically enough, a bigger sound to it. It's like the less you have, the more catchy it is, the more recognizable it is. And that's what I necessarily like about Demolition Group, how they use that mixture of EBM, dark wave and minimal wave to give this new fresh sound to the scene at the time, especially with the song You Better, which I think also translates, also the longer title is You Better Stay Alive. Even though it's got no vocals in it, but just the usage of guitars and instruments, how they're bouncing off another. First time I heard this song, I really couldn't stop like head bopping to it. It was one of those where if I'm in the club, I'll play it non-stop. It's just so beautiful. So even with their 1986 release, which has probably their best stuff up to that time, I really recommend it. I'll try and put a link down below if I can find it again, or some songs off it. So check out You Better Stay Alive, and my personal favourite is Bad Gag, because that is such a really awesome tune, and I'll throw it in now for you, so have fun. Okay, number 2, as I said, it's very hard to find information on a lot of these bands, but I'm really going on what I'm hearing as perspective as well as the information that I could find. And number 2, I've only found one release of this band, but from what I heard of it, it quickly grew to be one of my favourites. This is Max and Intro. There isn't really much about Max and Intro, but the reason why they're so high on this list is because of the reference that I hear of in them, which I can see why they were quite big for their time. They did release one single, one EP LP back in 1985, which is called We Designed the World. And off that, so you have about 3 main songs. You have The Belgrade Girl, in translation, Belgrade Devojka. You also have Ostavi Se, which means Leave It All. And then you have a couple of others which still worth checking out. I'll make sure that I put down We Design the Future, because what I love about Max and Intro is, even though that there isn't much I can find of them, I don't know if this is their only release, but the fact that they sound so much like Depeche Mode, it's crazy. It's like Slavic Depeche Mode, and I've always referred this to anyone who I show this to. And I genuinely love the sound of it. From the way how the vocalist sounds and acts like Dave from Depeche Mode, but also the way how the instruments sound. It's like if you mixed 84 to 85 Depeche Mode sound, electronics, with like 87, 88 vocal style of Depeche Mode. And that's the reason why I love Ostavi Se in particular of Max and Intro. And it wouldn't surprise me if this was a underground band that not many people heard, but exclusive to the people who have heard of them, because they're generally so entertaining to listen to, even if it's just one record. And this is why I had to put Max and Intro so high up on the list. So I hope you enjoy what We Design the Future. And just before we get to the number one pick, just going to present to you some honourable mentions of bands which I thought sounded really awesome, but once again, just like in my last video, not enough information to make a list out of. Okay, and number one, and there's a lot more which I can talk about on this one, because this band was actually pretty decently big back in the Yugoslavian era for the synth and new wave era, and that is Uskripsu. Now Uskripsu, they formed in Belgrade in Serbia about 1980 until about 1991 predominantly, because they did break up many times. I think the first bit was from 1980 to 85, and then on and off for a few years until properly 91, excluding some reunion shows. And what I like them is the fact that they're one of those bands, a little bit like EKV, where they mix art rock, post-punk and new wave, and they're predominantly more on the new wave spectrum. And what I like about their music is there are two sides to it. It's like they have like Depeche Mode syndrome, where they have a lot of the happier stuff, which I'm going to show you in a moment. When I mean happy, I mean more major-ish type of fast tempo type of music, which obviously was quite big back in the 80s, especially with the new wave scene growing predominantly more in the east as well as the west. So I'm going to give you a few examples right now. And then compared to like the later stuff, which became a lot more minor, a lot more darker and brooding, such as this. And that's what I kind of like. They had that mixture of evolving as a band. And even though it's very much electronic-y based with rock elements to it. And one of my favourite songs of theirs of all time is Belgrade is Sleeping. In fact, it's actually on the jacket I took off. I find that song to be such a beautifully dark constructed electronic piece, where if you were to ask me, it's like literally the darkest side of new wave. I think you can almost say it's touching commercial dark wave in many aspects. But it's one of those, when the first time I heard it, I found it so beautiful, and I didn't realise how popular it actually is in Serbia. It's been covered many times by various artists of various genres. So for that, I had to include Uskripsu as number one because of how, one, their popularity, second of all, the evolution of music that they did from when they first started up towards their end. That balance of like major constructed songs, and then composing to that type of darker, almost eerie type of sound, which you'll find many type of goth bands or darkling people being attracted to. And it's a little bit like the same in England or the West, where you have people who are predominantly more goth as an identification or subculture, but then they would not be afraid to necessarily listen to other things. So you had many people who did listen to Bauhaus and Sister Mercy, and you just go to the Batcave, but then you'd listen to like new romantic music or synth music or anything like that. So it's one of those cases where it's the same thing where, and I find it to be the same thing even like in like the Belgrade scene or the Ex Yugoslavian goth scene, where you used to have that kind of like a guilty pleasure of dibble-dabbing into other genres of music and not feeling bad about it, because it had that type of gateway which allowed you to, especially with dark songs like that. And once again, it's that type of similar thing with Depeche Mode, where they made that type of dark music, which allowed them to expand their audience, as well as still keeping to the original sound. Anyhow, I hope that you really enjoyed this video, and sorry that once again so short, but a lot of you were asking about some list on like my favourite Yugoslavian bands or ex-Yugoslavian goth bands or synth bands, so I thought I'd give you this one. I don't know when my next video is going to be, because as I said, I will be going to Serbia until the 12th of July, and then I'm going straight back into work. So I'm going to try to do another video before that. So fingers crossed. I'm not promising anything, so I'm going to see what I can do. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully it's expanded your creative taste a little bit, and I hope you check out the bands I mentioned, even in the honorable mentions, and hopefully see you very soon. Ciao.